Wall Street veteran Bernard Madoff has been arrested and charged with running a $50 billion Ponzi scheme.
Congress wants to know what caused the Enron meltdown.
Now, while the collective rage currently is focused on WorldCom,
Tyco CEO Dennis Kozlowski was convicted of looting hundreds of millions of dollars.
This is one of the biggest fraud cases ever.
Their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Find out more on this week's episode of White Collars, Red Hands.
When we talked about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, we mentioned that your data is one of the most expensive things that you own. And it is the coal that drives the fires of free-to-use online sites. It's so valuable that people are willing to steal it if they can. Of course, where the data is stolen from makes a lot of difference. If you hacked into, Instagram and stole my like history, sure, I'd be embarrassed.
Yeah.
But you'd be hard-pressed to ruin my life with it. If you hacked instead into a company that held, personal identifying information, or PII for short, including my social security and credit card numbers, then I'd be in for a larger world of pain. It would be even worse if I personally did not do business with the company that held all of this information, and the breach was caused directly by their incredible ineptitude. So today, we have an example of just that, as we discuss the Equifax Data Breach scandal of 2017. We'll find out what was stolen, how Equifax really dropped the ball since they knew about the issue for years beforehand and never fixed it, and find out the trail of digital breadcrumbs from the crime and how it led to an enemy of the state on this week's episode of White Collars, Red Hands.
I remember when this happened.
Well, it was only 8 years ago, Nina, so...
Yeah. But I remember I was living in Japan and I had to freeze my Equifax.
Which you can now do for free because of this scandal today. So while not the biggest scandal that's ever happened, not even in the top 10 actually.
Terrifying.
It is definitely, or at least the top 10 for data breaches by volume of people who were affected by the data breach. This one is special because of the information that was included. But it is also special because it was really, they were so stupid about it. Mm-hmm. So I think it highlights that they weren't just hacked. They were hacked, but it's because they were dumb. But welcome back to another episode of White Collars, Red Hands, everyone. I'm Kashan.
And I'm Nina.
And today, like I said, we're talking about the Equifax data breach scandal of 2017. As many of you know, Equifax is one of the big three credit reporting agencies, or CRAs, here in America, along with Experian and TransUnion.
I'm an Equifax Sun, an Experian Rising, and a TransUnion Moon.
And they all just mean you're an insufferable asshole, which is crazy. It's so spot on.
Oh my God, how did you know?
Collectively, these three companies hold credit reports on almost every American citizen, and that controls whether we can get extended lines of credit to buy things that are becoming increasingly overpriced, like houses, cars, or a dozen large-size eggs.
Everything's too expensive.
For those of you who don't know the history of CRAs, or credit unions, it turns out that these credit unions got their start by being little gossips back in the 1700s, when the first known organization for sharing credit information was founded in London and dubbed the Society of Guardians for the Protection of Trade Against Swindlers and Sharpers.
Of course it was that long.
People in
It's
London,
the
man.
fucking English.
And this is like wig hi-hats, This is a bunch of merchant men in tights and tricorn hats who would get together and just like talk shit about who hadn't repaid loans that they took out, but also other stuff like whose wife was cheating on him, who was maybe a bit of a fancy, So yes, they would kind of spread rumors about people for sure. For a long while, these groups of merchants would pop up everywhere and keep tabs on who was good for paying back loans locally and just keep information on people who were interested in taking lines of credit. But they didn't share information amongst each other. They were local. They talked about who was there, and they didn't talk between towns. There really wasn't a need to. People didn't move around a lot.
Right. And also, people really probably, I'm assuming, weren't going to another town to get a loan.
Not usually.
No.
In 1899, two brothers from Maryland had the dream of changing this.
Thanks, guys.
So Guy and Catter Wolford started the Retail Credit Company in Atlanta, Georgia. There, they went door to door to the creditors in the area and gathered information on people to publish a book titled The Merchant's Guide that they would sell to companies so they could flip through and they would know. It was information on companies mostly about if they were good on paying back their loans. They also started offering individual credit reports for people for the first time to companies that asked for it. So that was kind of revolutionary. And this business model, obviously, they're around. It's a big business today. It took off. And by the 20s, they had offices throughout America and Canada. They also held files on millions of people at that time already and had even started offering various forms of insurance. And most of the companies they reported their credit reports to were actually to other insurance providers. They were providing reports on people to insurance companies to tell them if they should cover them with their insurance.
Okay.
They eventually took the company public in 1965, but at this point, they were already coming under fire for what was contained in those credit reports. They would literally, like when they were generating these reports on people, they would comb through newspapers. And if there were clippings of you like getting arrested for drunk driving or fighting with your spouse or something evil like clapping when the plane landed.
Oh, the worst of all.
You know, they would include those clippings, like they'd cut it out and put it in your file. This is when files were paper. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the 20s.
They would even go around to your neighbors and collect personal statements on the quality of your character.
In the credit report?
Yeah, because it was mostly for insurance. So they were like, it was a professional keep tabs on people industry.
This is crazy.
They were trying to generate as much information about everyone as possible. They would disguise themselves as like, I guess the welcome wagon was like an actual thing, not just like a saying of these people that would go around to new people in town and like talk to them, welcome to the neighborhood. They would pose as them or fund them and infiltrate them and then learn about new people that moved to the area to include them in
those things,
the local credit reports. So that's obviously, you know, if you're getting all this information about people, sometimes those files contained actual facts based in numbers. But they also were known to contain multiple inaccuracies.
Yeah, I would assume.
And just rumors about people's, you know, sex life, marital life, sexuality, race, and political activities. All things that would allow companies to unfairly discriminate against you based on things you can't control, not just your payment history, which led to unfair treatment of queer people and people of color. You know, you could put a name on an application, but now they would ask for a file and be like, this person is gay and or black or whatever, and then insurance companies could then be like, okay.
Be like, well, no, I'm not going to cover.
Yeah, don't cover them. This was exposed publicly in the 1970s after the digitization of the RCC's records made it easier to access credit reports and prompted the government to step in. After Congress questioned credit reporting agencies, focusing heavily on RCC, they finally passed the Fair Credit Reporting Act in 1971 that made it so the following things. Consumers must be notified if negative action is taken against them because of the information in their credit files. Consumers must be able to find out what is in their credit files.
Oh, they weren't able to know?
No.
God.
No, you didn't even have, you weren't, so like now.
Now you can have just Credit Karma on your phone.
Yeah, now you know they like,
Click.
They need to provide you with like a weekly free access to your credit report. So no, before they couldn't do that, before the Fair Credit Reporting Act in 1971.
That's insane.
Consumers must be able to dispute inaccurate information and have it corrected or deleted, something they couldn't do beforehand. Outdated information, which is generally more than 7 to 10 years old for negative information, cannot be reported. It's got to be taken out of their report. Consumers must provide consent for employers to check their credit reports. Consumers must have the option to request to be excluded from lists for unsolicited credit and insurance offers. Consumers who appear on a list of prospects requested by a lender must be extended a firm offer of credit. And this was amongst a few other things, but those were some of the highlights. This obviously, though, came with a lot of bad publicity for the RCC. They
for
were
sure.
so bad that they decided to change their name. And in 1975, they became Equifax as we know them today. So either people actually didn't care that much about the congressional hearings, or the rebrand worked because Equifax just kept getting bigger, as we know, expanding further to the UK and acquiring new departments for identity verification, employment records, market research, just kind of continually growing until 2017. Now they had the records of over 800 million people, including that personal identifying information, such as social security numbers, addresses, credit card numbers, employment status, and much more, a good chunk of which was now going to be at risk. So, although the data breach occurred in 2017, the real story begins 2 years before that. Equifax would perform internal audits of systems to make sure that everything was A-OK. In 2015, they ran an internal audit of their cybersecurity system, likely in response to the largest data breach of all time. Remember, I said this wasn't even the top 10? Mm-hmm. Well, the largest data breach of all time happened in 2013 when 3 billion people had their emails and passwords leaked when Yahoo was hacked.
Oh, my God.
That's the largest of all time.
That's bad.
By the way, Yahoo was also hacked 1 year later in 2014, and another 500 million people had their data accessed.
Oh my God. How many accounts did they have total?
I don't know. Well, I think at this time in 2013...
Well, they were like the leader at that point.
They were the industry leader, so...
Is that
a lot?
That's why they fell, right? Probably.
I'm assuming it's at least part of it.
Probably.
But I don't remember. I
don't remember that, but I wouldn't... No.
I still have a Yahoo Mail account and they suck. It's where I send all the it's my like black
mail.
hole that I send everything to go to die. Yeah. It's the shadow realm.
Yes.
You know. So it's where I send Yugi's grandpa. There is a government agency, USCERT, or US CERT is what I'm going to call it, that is responsible for gathering information about potential cyber attack weaknesses and letting people know about them. They disseminate the information. They use another very acronym-heavy way of scoring these vulnerabilities based on how bad they are, called the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS, which assigns a number 1 to 10, 1 being baby's first backdoor code vulnerability, and 10 being a backdoor vulnerability the size of Sasha Gray's. Equifax used these ratings to place needed software patches into categories of critical, high, medium, and low priority. You could have just used the number system. Don't know if you know that, Equifax. Totally fine. Whatever. During that 2015 internal audit, they found that Equifax had over 1,000 critical, high, and medium level vulnerabilities that had not been patched, and that greater than 65% of those were more than 90 days old.
Oh, wow.
At the time that they did the internal audit, which that's pretty bad because the current policy for Equifax was that critical vulnerabilities should be patched within 48 hours. High vulnerabilities should be patched within 30 days and medium vulnerabilities should be patched within 90. They have 1,000 of all of those that are past 90. On top of that, patches were not done automatically. They asked their IT teams to be signed up for like push notifications from software companies, so that they would be notified about vulnerabilities in software that they used. They were like, hey, make sure if you're using a software to sign up for push notifications for it. Like, okay. The security team would run scans on their system and then notify personnel if vulnerabilities were found. But they would only patch the systems if the scans showed the vulnerabilities, and they didn't really have anything to verify that their scans were correct or doing a good job at all. And this model of trusting the scans and not proactively implementing patches was known as the honor system at Equifax. It is good to point out that this is not recommended.
Yeah.
Most places, when they learn of a vulnerability, they just make sure that every instance of that software that they have that has the vulnerability is up to date.
That makes sense.
They don't scan and be like, well, I didn't find anything.
Oh, well.
You know, they proactively go out and look. Of course, that leads to the next issue, that Equifax did not keep a detailed IT asset inventory of either hardware or software that they had. So they were kind of like blind as to what software was running on the machines on their network. They didn't know what was downloaded and where. And they didn't even have a good idea of like where their actual physical assets, like the servers and computers that they had out, necessarily were, which is crazy to think that such a large company is so bad at doing this stuff.
Yeah.
So if there was a vulnerability, like, I don't know, let's say in Candy Crush, they couldn't accurately tell which of their company issued phones had Candy Crush downloaded on it to go implement the patch. So that's why they had to run the scans, because they didn't even know what was on their stuff. And then on top of that, they couldn't verify that the scans were working properly and reaching every device because they didn't know all the devices they were trying to look for. Also, because of this, when they were patching vulnerabilities, they didn't have a good idea about which devices were affected, were more critical. So they might spend time prioritizing fixing the vulnerability on some like random ass person's laptop when it was actually present on a server that held a bunch of people's information.
So they could have just fixed it on the server instead of the laptop. But,
yeah, they should have done it there first. Yeah.
Okay, but because it was just on the here's my question. If they had fixed it on the server, would that cover the issue on the laptop, or would they still have to fix the laptop?
No, if there's any instance of the software downloaded anywhere that has the bug in the code,
you have to fix
exploiting,
it wherever that software is downloaded.
Yeah, it's just that external people are more likely to get into the server because the server connects to the network than like someone's random laptop, because then they would have to be looking for it on someone's laptop.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
But because they didn't know where things were downloaded, they might start fixing it on the laptop first.
Makes sense.
All of this was discovered in the 2015 audit. And the leadership, they got together, they said, hey, let's fix all of this so that we don't become the next Yahoo. We'll implement automated systems to detect vulnerabilities. We'll preemptively patch. On top of that, we'll put together an asset list. We'll get it all settled out, guys. And then they dragged their feet hardcore and performed no follow-up audits, clapping themselves on the back and saying what a good job they did identifying the issues, but then actually solving none of them.
Oh my God.
So they put together this whole plan, and then no one
didn't do anything.
Yeah, just no one did anything.
Excellent.
Which, if you've ever worked in a corporate environment,
you would know that's how it works.
Yeah, you get that. You're like, didn't we know all of these problems? Didn't we have a plan to address all of them?
And they're like, kind of.
They're like, yeah, but we just didn't. We just didn't do it.
Didn't feel like it.
Yeah, I dropped the ball on that one. I don't know what to say. One vulnerability that made its way through the cracks was for an open source Java web application software. Don't worry about the specifics. It helped make websites. That's all you need to know. And it was called Apache Struts. Apache had been aware of this vulnerability, and the US CERT had labeled it a 10, which is the highest, remember, on their scale, largely because there was code floating around online with detailed instructions of how to exploit the vulnerability. So you didn't even need to be an expert hacker, just like mildly technologically literate and on a specific like 4chan page to be able to use it for nefarious purposes.
Okay.
Apache had developed and released a security patch for the vulnerability, so you could fix it as of March 7th, 2017. The next day, the Equifax cybersecurity team received the notice from US CERT and distributed it to 400 employees, urging them to patch any instances of the affected Apache struts within 48 hours. They also discussed this specific vulnerability in cybersecurity monthly meetings in March and April of that year, although later it was found out that upper management did not regularly attend these meetings. So
great.
Later they were like, we didn't even know what was going on. We didn't go to those meetings. You're like, awesome.
Of course you didn't.
So they were aware, or at least someone was, and supposedly fixing the issue. But because they didn't have an exhaustive list of who actually had the application, they failed to put everyone on that distribution list. So it should have went to more than 400 people. And the alert was actually not sent out to at least one software developer who used the application to build their online dispute portal. So he never patched the issue. Additionally, there is some evidence based on the FTC final report of the incident that seems to insinuate that no employee ever started to patch the struts vulnerability at any point until after it was already exploited. Equifax ran scans but never caught unpatched versions of the software. On top of that, they had let something called an SSL certificate lapse on their online dispute portal server, so the same server that had the Apache struts. I don't fully understand what that is, and you don't really need to, but the gist is that an SSL certificate enables encryption between the server and someone using the website. So it lets you know that your communication with the website is protected. Mm-hmm. If you go to a website that has this, you'll see a little lock in your URL bar. So you know that all of the information you're sharing with the server is encrypted. On the company side, it lets them examine the encrypted traffic because they can decrypt it then and examine the traffic that's going both from their site to the user and from their user to the site. Without it, Equifax would not be able to tell what encrypted commands were being sent to their servers, and this certificate was down for 8 months. They let it last for 8 months.
Wow.
So, oh no, I sure hope there were no malicious encrypted commands being sent to their server through their unpatched struts backdoor.
That would never happen.
Of course not. Well, on July 29th, 2017, the Equifax team finally got around to updating that SSL certificate. And surprise, once they did, it actually started doing its job.
That makes sense.
When they booted that thing up, it told them that they had some traffic coming from their online dispute portal from an IP address in China, a country where Equifax does not operate.
No.
So they immediately blocked the IP address. The next day, however, they found more suspicious traffic, also from China, and they decided to take down the whole server.
Good idea.
After looking over the logs, Equifax discovered that IP addresses first started accessing their server through the vulnerability in the Apache Struts program on May 13th, 2017. That's 2 months after a patch for the vulnerability had been announced and distributed. This means that they had 78 days of unfettered access to the Equifax servers before they ever caught them.
Oh my God, that's so long.
Yeah.
Whoa. Oh my God, so many people are about to get fired.
They
should anyway.
They think it's long if you're have access to servers for hours. So 78
days is they could grab everything.
78 days is crazy. It's very wild. After the hackers originally broke into the server, they immediately did not have access to all of the personal identifying information of Equifax customers. Those were locked behind, passwords and things. Equifax, however, kept unencrypted usernames and passwords for its workers in a data repository that they could access, and this allowed them to log in using actual credentials. Also, due to the lack of two-factor authentication. They didn't have two-factor authentication set up.
You know what's crazy? Equifax didn't have two-factor authentication set up, but the protein powder I ordered does.
Well, now everything does.
For the protein powder is crazy.
Everything does. So this helped them stay unnoticed, and they could access information that contained all of that information that I previously mentioned: social security numbers, credit card numbers, addresses. The hackers would copy this information in chunks to a smaller, separate archive, and then from that archive, they could download it to their personal devices, again, in an attempt to avoid detection. If you're just offloading a bunch of data from these servers that people shouldn't be accessing that much, it's going to get noticed. And after 78 days, they'd been able to remove information of 143 million Americans, in addition to 14 million British and 8,000 Canadian residents.
Wow.
And this included the unredacted credit card numbers of 209,000 Americans.
Oh my God. I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was this bad.
Most of this number also got bumped up by a few more million, 148 million by the end of it. Most of that was still bad stuff. It was their name, social security numbers, addresses. But yeah, 209,000 unredacted credit card numbers is crazy.
Yeah, it's bad.
2 days after the attack, the company's CEO, Richard Smith, super original name, by the way, man. Richard Smith.
Yeah.
I know you didn't choose it, but come on, man.
His mom and dad needed talking to.
He was told about the breach, but Equifax did not immediately notify the public or those affected by the leak until they had supposedly identified every person impacted, which took 6 weeks from when they originally discovered it.
Oh my God.
And that was 4 months after the information was originally accessed.
Leaked. Oh my God. So much shit could have happened with their information.
Yeah, exactly. They publicly announced the attacks on September 7th of that year, 2017, and immediately saw their stock drop by 13%.
Good reason.
This is because, and the reason that they could do this, that they could wait so long, is because there is no national law stating when or even if companies have to tell people that their data has been accessed on servers or that a data breach has occurred. Instead, it is governed by a state-to-state legislature. I'm pretty sure that all 50 states do have some law, but they're all different. So there's this patchwork of regulations that hold more or less stringent rules. Sometimes you have to do it within 60 days, sometimes within 90 days. I think California's just says without unreasonable delay, like it just says that. It doesn't actually provide a number.
Well, that is kind of like up to...
Yeah, so it can make it a little bit hard to follow, and depending on where the company is located, now they have to abide by different rules. Of course, though, all of this could have been avoided if Equifax had just properly controlled their cybersecurity, or even made changes when they identified the issues in 2015. These were all exploits that were a direct result of problems that they knew were already inherent in their cybersecurity system, and they just decided not to do anything, which is crazy. If you're wondering about what happened to the other two of the big three credit unions because of the Apache Struts vulnerability, because they also used Apache Struts, the answer would be a big fat nothing.
Of course.
They had been doing kind of everything correctly and had patched the software within days of the notice on all their devices.
Oh, so they did the right thing.
Yeah. Well, and these hackers, like people were going online and just like scanning for companies that were using this vulnerable version of the software. So it's probably why it took 2 months for them to finally find that Equifax was doing it. Just so happened that they also had let that license lapse, which made it so they could access it for even longer and not get caught. Just kind of a comedy of errors on Equifax's part, honestly. Later that month, on September 26th, good old Richard Smith announced his retirement at the ripe age of 57, getting out of there before he could face the multiple lawsuits that were headed their way.
You know what? I don't blame him.
Hundreds of people affected by the breach individually sued Equifax, winning personal awards, but a large amount of money was given back to the victims when Equifax settled with the FTC in July of 2019, agreeing to pay $300 million into a fund to compensate them, in addition to $275 million in fines, partially to the regions where they were operating, and just fines to the FTC and the government in general. Additionally, in the UK, they also paid a fine of £11 million for the affected British residents. In February of 2020, so 3 years later, 4 Chinese citizens were indicted by the Department of Justice for committing the attack on Equifax, and they were charged with conspiracy to commit computer fraud, economic espionage, and wire fraud, amongst others. The American government claimed that these 4 were acting on behalf of the Chinese government, gaining intel on American citizens. Of course, this claim has been refuted by the Chinese government. It is likely, though, that these 4 will ever face trial.
Unlikely.
What did I say?
Likely.
Okay. But it is unlikely that these 4 will ever face trial, as their whereabouts are unknown, even to this day, and they would likely need to be extradited to the U.S. from wherever they are.
And China would have to
approve. If they're still in China, China would have to approve it.
And they're not going to. Especially now, they're not going to.
No. In addition to the mishandling of the situation in the aftermath, 2 executives, former Chief Intelligence Officer Jun Ying and manager Duhakar Reddy Bantu, were found guilty of insider trading and sentenced to 4 months in jail and 8 months home confinement, respectively, for them. In the 6 weeks between when they learned about the breach and announcing it publicly, it turns out these 2 had been selling shares in the company because they anticipated the drop.
Oh, good.
So
nice.
So there were some convictions here. They went to prison for insider trading. Since the breach, the only direct legislation created to address information protection in credit unions has once again been the one that I mentioned that allows customers to freeze your credit for free. Now, that was only possible as of 2018 and in direct response to this, but the American legislature has still not passed any sweeping
laws against it.
Legislation on yet. Regulations or practices related to data breaches or data privacy even. So in the end, Equifax may not have been the one committing a crime directly. They were in part victims of bad actors potentially working for an enemy of the state. However, they were so negligent in the basics of cybersecurity that I think we can victim blame them here, at least a little bit. On top of that, the information stored about consumers and credit unions is usually done so without direct interaction with the consumer. Remember, before you couldn't even see what they had on you. But it isn't like you can opt out of your information being there because, as they'll tell you, the only thing worse than bad credit is no credit.
Yeah.
You will be gate-kept out of things that might be necessary for your survival, like a car if you live somewhere where you need one, or things that are directly necessary for survival, like housing.
Yep.
You know, when I moved to the city, I didn't even have a good cosigner.
Right.
My friend's parents had to co-sign on
your apartment.
On our apartment until I had 2 years of good paying history. Because I didn't even have a credit card.
Because you moved here right after college.
Yeah, and I didn't have a credit card. So I had no credit, basically. So it was bad. So the fact that a company would be so royally stupid with this sensitive information is just infuriating. So the only call to action I can make is that the federal government finally implement sweeping rules that require immediate public notice of any data breach that could affect consumers, and that they strengthen the penalties for companies that are not doing their due diligence in regards to keeping personal identifying information safe. And honestly, we just need sweeping reform of online privacy.
Yes.
This is not new technology. We need to govern it like many other countries have. Get on it, American lawmakers. And yeah, with that is the story of Equifax, and not one of the largest data breaches of all time, but definitely one of the most infuriating to learn about.
Yeah, no, it's super frustrating because they knew they knew they needed to fix stuff, and then they just didn't do it, and they didn't care.
By the way, Equifax is doing fine.
Yeah, they're fine.
Just in case you were worried about
no,
them.
it's like they've never been affected.
They're fine. They're making money hand over fist. There's only 3 credit reporting agencies that really matter in America, and
They're still, unfortunately, one of them.
They make a lot of money, so they're not going anywhere. If you'd like us to make a lot of money and to not go anywhere,
I would like us to make a lot of money.
We can segue into our beg for you guys to do stuff section. I'm sure it's your favorite. And today we're begging for you to please leave a review if you want to support the show. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts. Most of you are listening there. Statistics show. Or you can just leave a star review either on there or on Spotify. If you're on Spotify, you can also see our faces. Hello, everyone on Spotify and also on YouTube at youtube.com/whitecollarsredhands. You can watch our videos. We do that. So hopefully you are watching them. But if you can't support us by writing a review, leaving a review, you can also like, subscribe, share, whatever you can do on whatever podcatcher or mode you're listening on. That'd be awesome. If you want an unfree way to support us, you can also go ahead and check out our merch. If you go to our website, whitecollarsredhands.com, and click on the button that says check out our merch, you can go to our Dashery store, and you'll be able to buy all sorts of accoutrements there with our one of 2 of our logos on it. There's even variety.
Huh? Oh, cool.
We did that for you. You can also support us by connecting with us on social media. You can also DM us on there at facebook.com/whitecollarsredhands, X at whitecollarspod, Instagram at whitecollars_redhands, and TikTok. We'd release teasers every week for our episodes on TikTok at whitecollarsredhands. You can also drop us a line through our email, whitecollarsredhands@gmail.com, or once again, go to that website and there's a contact us option. Either way, utilize that to suggest an episode for us. We do a fan-submitted episode every single season. I think we did multiple this season.
We did.
And yours
could be next.
So please, drop it there.
Because it's actually not that long until we start making our 20th season.
It is not. So please get it in. And who knows? I might be moving. I forgot to mention. Sorry we canceled last week. I had a big life update that happened.
Yeah.
So I had to cancel last minute. So thank you guys for still coming back. Sorry for the week off.
You know what? I think that one unplanned skip in 5 years, I think it's okay.
We've been very good about the timeline, but yeah, so sorry we weren't here last week. If that ruined your week, terribly sorry. but we're back now. So
now.
everything's all right. And speaking of, if you want to support us, please support us by telling a friend. Word of mouth. You know, you had a whole week to think about how much you loved us.
How much you missed me.
You know? So, just you?
Yeah.
Fucked up, man.
I'm the one with boobs.
Fucked up. But yeah, please tell someone. Shout it out loud. Write it in your will. And bury it in a time capsule so they can re-find our show in 100 years when all of us are dead. Mm-hmm. That's what I hope for. That's what I want. And I think that's going to be it for today. So thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you next week on another episode of White Collars, Red Hands.